Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Crescendo, a podcast that amplifies the voices of women. I'm your host, Rachel Lubchansky, and I am so happy to be on this journey with you. In each episode, we speak with women who have moved through the challenges and triumphs of living a life that is in alignment with who they are at their core. You'll hear from women who are breaking down barriers, making a difference in the world, and living a life of purpose on purpose. I hope that the crescendo stories you hear on this show will inspire you, empower you, and guide you to step into the most authentic, full expression of your own voice. I am looking forward to welcoming my guest today, Duschanca Singh, who is a holistic empowerment coach and Reiki practitioner. She is all about helping women break free from feeling stuck, stagnant, and spiritless. Her mission is to guide them on a journey of self-discovery, fostering an increase in self-love and a purposeful way of living. Through her podcast, That Was the Moment, Duschanca shares inspiring and empowering stories of life-changing moments. She's also a dedicated fur mom to Jayda, a rescue staffie cross, which I have so many questions about. Without further ado, welcome, Duschanca. I am so happy you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, let's just talk about your fur baby for a second before we get into
Sure.
your
My
story.
my favorite topic.
Amazing. Okay, it's a rescue
Yeah.
staffie cross. Tell me, what does this mean?
So because she's a rescue, we don't know her full origins. She was about 2 years old when I adopted her. And so she looks very much like a staffie, but she's much smaller. So she's definitely crossed with something else. So yeah, everyone loves to have a guess, but I think maybe a Chihuahua, because she's quite small and she's got the coloring of a Chihuahua and sometimes the Chihuahua attitude. So
Awesome. We gotta love that in our pups, don't we? Okay,
yeah, she's a
so
beautiful girl.
wonderful. So before we get into today's conversation, tell us a little bit more about you, who you are, where you're joining me in this conversation from, and how you got there.
So I am in Australia, in Sydney. I moved back to Sydney just over 2 years ago. I had been living in London for nearly 18 years, but the call of the beach and my family was very strong. So I decided to move back. And it was also just after COVID. So there was I just felt the need to be closer to home after the world shut down. So yeah, so I'm now in Sydney and loving being back, loving being back in the sunshine and going to the beach almost every day and taking my dog for walks to the beach because she's also from London. um, so yeah, really enjoying getting back into that Aussie lifestyle. It's a beautiful, beautiful, relaxed lifestyle compared to London anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Okay, so you shared with me a really moving story about changing your voice when you were 10 years old. If we can kind of go back a few decades, I'd love to hear that story and have you share more about it.
Yeah, so I was actually born in South Africa in the 1980s. So that was during apartheid. So essentially it was segregation. So I wasn't allowed to mix with people that were white. I had to stay away from them basically. And in 1990, we emigrated to Australia and we moved to what was at the time a really white part of Australia. And I remember going to school and there were only about three other people of color in my class compared to how I'd previously been going to school with, only people of color. So that was quite a shock. And I remember being quite intimidated by white people, purely because I'd never been around them. I had one aunt who was Irish, and that was kind of it because you weren't allowed to mingle. So when I was at school, I I was in year 5 when I moved over, and the kids at school, I was very different in the way I looked, the way I spoke. And I remember some kids actually picking on my speech more than anything because the South African accent is quite strong. And I remember that there were a couple of words that I would say that they particularly took offense to. So anything with a thing at the end, so something. So rather than saying something, I would say something um, as part of my accent. And I remember just being kind of, I guess, bullied because of my voice and, just picked on. And um, yeah, so it, I wanted it to stop. And I made a conscious decision to change the way I spoke because if I started speaking like everyone else, then they wouldn't be able to pick on me. So I essentially started changing my voice so that I could adapt. I think that happens naturally with children because children do kind of mimic their surroundings. But I remember specifically making an effort not to say those words. It started off with those words that I was being picked on, and then it eventually, moved to other things. So that was kind of, I think that's the first time that I started altering my voice to fit into my environment.
It's a really powerful story because so many of us have sort of this unspoken, like this recollection that something must have happened. Like we have this deep-seated feeling that, our voices have been suppressed in some way, or we've changed them, or we haven't fully freed them, but we can't necessarily name the story that or the
Mm.
moment that defines how we use our voice for the next, we were talking beforehand, so I'll just out you now being, three or 4 decades later. Um, right. So many of us don't have that specific story. So you're 10 years old and here you are already adjusting how you
Mhm.
speak, what you say, how you act as a result of this just human desire that is very natural, which is to fit in.
Yeah. And I think also being in such a different environment, it was just all so foreign to me to be around people that were white, that spoke differently, that, um, you know, and especially on the Central Coast at the time, absolutely almost everyone was blonde haired, blue eyed, and, and now I embrace that I am different, but 10-year-old and going into my teens as well, you don't want to be different. You want to be the same, and you just have to look at high schoolers and you will see that they will all have the same bags. They will wear their hair the same way, wear the same clothes because you want to fit in. And yeah, as you said, that need to belong is you know, it's it's in us, even if we don't know that it's there.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so I find this really fascinating because here you've painted this picture of you at 10 years old. And then I understand that you spent 2 decades working in finance management. So in
Mhm.
white man's land. How
Yes.
did you get there?
So I actually, yeah, I started working in a bank just as a cashier, and then kind of decided actually I like the finance world, so I got into investment management and started in Sydney, and then moved over to London and continued in different areas of investment management. And yeah, it is a very white man world, and I guess I started adapting to that scenario as well and that environment. So I very much became one of the lads and, joined in with the drinking culture. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy a drink beforehand. So that worked in my favor. But yeah, I remember I I used to feel very proud that I was considered one of the guys. And so I was adapting myself to be a white man, and not even just a white man. A lot of people that I worked with were very, very, very well educated. I dropped out of high school, so I was not that. So they were very different from me, and I felt that I became a different person. And there was still some, my core was still the same. But yeah, I definitely changed and adapted to fit into that environment. And it was
I
only
want to
after,
pause for a second. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
sure.
did you know at the time that that was happening? Because you just described how at your core, you're the same person, like, you know who you
Mm.
are. But it's more this external expression of who you are that adapted to the environment. So was it apparent to you then?
So it was in a couple of different ways, not blatantly, but there were some things that I needed to do. So, for example, while I worked at the investment manager, I still had this deep desire to help people. So I used to volunteer my time. And so I used to volunteer in charity shops and then at a rescue center. And so I was still having these little outlets to continue to be me. But when I got to work, I felt very different. I felt like,
It's like two different people, like depending upon
yeah,
the circumstances and the environment.
definitely. And I think, we all wear different masks, right? Whether
Mhm.
we are aware of it or not, we do. And it's about, I think, I would put on my clothes and go into the office, and I'd become just this different person. And I think uh, eventually I started realizing I actually don't like this person.
Mm.
I don't like how she behaves. I don't like how she treats people. Because again, I was really trying to fit into my environment, and I was trying to get respect from my colleagues by being that boss bitch, if you like. I'm sorry, I should have asked you if I could swear. But
All good.
I was trying to get the respect and by being that boss, and that was not me. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm very bossy, but I think the way I was going about it was just it was not me. And um I think with anything, it's once you have that realization that something's not right, you can't get rid of it, and it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's what happened to me. And eventually
Mm.
I kind of had my spiritual awakening and just went, this is not the life I want to live anymore.
Mm.
And
Okay, so is that what started what you describe as your self-love journey? That sort of
definitely,
mhm.
yeah. And it kind of started with one of my dogs dying.
Mm.
And it was, my first ever dog as an adult. And it just really, her death just really rocked me to the core. And um, I just, it made me question everything about my life. I'm working at this job, but I'm not really happy. I'm doing from the outside, it looks like I've got my stuff together, but really I was just so unhappy inside. But I was masking it with amazing holidays to Barbados and Egypt and, like just getting all the external things that I thought was going to eventually make me feel happy and fulfilled. Like I said, I was volunteering at an animal shelter, and that just gave me so much fulfillment. But again, that was only for one day a week that I would feel, incredible and feel like me. Um, so yeah, I think that just that whole period of my life, it was my reset. It was definitely my reset. And I decided to quit my job. I hadn't even had a new job lined up, which is so unlike me. But I just knew that I needed to not be in that environment anymore. And I needed to rediscover myself and, get back in touch, become a person that I liked again.
Mm. Mhm.
And yeah, so that's how it started.
Yeah, I could really relate to that story. I'll be sharing a lot more about my own story on the podcast, but I like how you kind of described in not so many words, but you sort of went from making these intentional decisions, right? Like from your headspace to listening to your knowing, right? To making decision from your heart, from the things that were calling you more
Hmm.
deeply. It's a powerful shift
Hmm.
to make. Right, to especially as people who are aspirational and maybe hard workers and high achieving, and it sounds like, you realized that you wanted to do this, and so you wanted to get into the man's world and become one of them and earn their respect, and all of that came from this intellectual desire, right? This, like,
Yeah,
mental space or this mind space, and to start listening to your heart, how did that feel?
scary, to be honest. So I think, when I went through that awakening, I started meditating. And it was really hard to begin with because I didn't like the voices in my head. And when I was when I started meditating, it was the first time that I had given myself the space to listen to those voices. Because before that, I was distracting myself so I didn't have to hear it. I was out drinking and partying and dating and, everything else, traveling and, you know, just distraction, distraction, distraction. And I have a theory that overachievers are actually super avoiders.
Mm,
And, if I'm achieving something, I can distract myself from actually what's really happening in my head. And that's how I felt I was, and um, starting to meditate and sit with myself. It was scary. It was hard. And I had a lot of sadness during that period because I started realizing how much I abandoned myself for different things. I abandoned myself in relationships. I abandoned myself in my career. I would just, at any opportunity, I would abandon myself. And it was when I started doing the self-help journey, which I think a lot of people do, which is, really great to get that self-awareness. And I started reading books and I started, listening to audiobooks and just kind of trying to understand why I am the way I am. And once I started to dig deeper into that, I started doing things that gave myself love.
mm,
And I made the decision to stop looking for love externally. So I essentially stopped dating for almost 8 years. Well, I was going on dates, but I would never get any further because I hadn't found someone that I thought, actually, no, I love myself so much now that you're not good enough for me. Where
yeah.
before that, I was kind of like, I'll take anyone. Yeah, yeah, you, yeah, 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 great.
I
um,
love that. I love myself so much that you're not good enough for me. I
yeah,
love, like, using that as the barometer, like, measuring, right? And I think so often, many of us, myself included, find ourselves looking for love in all the wrong places, as the saying goes, right?
definitely.
Whereas we're right here. Hello. Like,
Yeah,
right here. Starts
yeah,
right here.
yeah. And I think it's so natural. Yeah, that the Jerry Maguire movie, like that just ruined it for everyone. Like, you complete me. That's what crap. Do you know what I mean? Like, what? That's just such nonsense because, and I think that's what I was searching for. And I know I'm not alone. I was waiting for, it's that be rescued, like a job's going to rescue me, a man's going to rescue me, a new house is going to rescue me, a new car, but really the only person that can rescue you is yourself. And,
Yes.
when I switched my mindset from you compliment me instead of complete me, that was the huge change that I needed. And it's been so much better since then. And I think it's still easy. I'm now in my first relationship since that huge break, and I'm still navigating through that. And it's really interesting because my old habits want to come back, my old habits of codependency, and I'm now dating this guy that is so self-aware and so, he really wants this independent relationship, and which is exactly what I want. But the little, that codependent part of me is still in there, and I try to grasp at it, but it's really wonderful because I've got this wonderful man that I can just have this conversation with and say, oh, hang on, that old stuff from the past, it's coming back, and then we work through it together. So yeah, I think the journey of self-love is never ending, and I don't think there's ever going to be a point where you love yourself enough. I think you've always got to keep on loving yourself and working on yourself, just as you would work on your relationship with your partner, your friend, your parents. Your relationship with yourself needs constant care, constant attention, constant nurturing. So
Absolutely. So what does that work look like for you? What are some of the practical strategies or things that you do to nurture yourself on a regular basis and to nurture that self-love?
the first thing is the self-talk, right? I looked at my self-talk and, it still slips in, the negative stuff slips in. Um, but looking at that self-talk, and a really, really good, I guess, barometer is, would you say this to your best friend? What you're saying in your head, would you actually speak that out to someone else? And the answer is always no. You would never.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
So why?
I love thinking of that because it's like, yeah, why would we say that? I think of
But think
my
of the
best
things.
friend and I'm like, sh we've been best friends for 40 some odd years. I would never say those things to her.
Yeah. And
Incredible.
now,
Just that
and
one
now,
small shift. Yep.
yeah. And now think about, would you say it to a 5-year-old child? Would you say it to a 14-year-old girl? Because those are the parts that you were talking to, those inner child parts. So, you've got a 5-year-old kid there. Would you say those things? Would you say, oh, look how fat you look today? Would you say that? Absolutely not, you know?
Right.
And so yeah, I think that's the first thing that needs to change. And it's, again, it's a constant work. Because something will happen and you automatically go, oh my God, you're so stupid for doing that. And then I have to stop myself and go, I made a mistake, and hey, move on. But yeah, changing that self-talk and being aware of the self-talk. Um, so that's kind of where I started. And then really spending time with yourself and, dating yourself and working out, what do you enjoy? What brings you joy? What lights you up? And then doing more of that.
I love
A
this
lot of
concept
people,
of dating yourself. I think so often we like get into the rhythms of our lives and we kind of just keep going through. Maybe it's status quo, maybe it's a little better than that, but generally, like do we really, most of us take time out just for ourselves, or are we always thinking of like, how is this going to serve one of the hats that I wear in this
Mhm.
world?
Yeah.
So I love that.
I also think it's if you're in a relationship, I know for me, in my past relationships, I would totally lose myself. And again, I would adapt to the person I was dating. And I think that's a very common thing for women to do. And so when I started on the self-love journey, I stopped to think, what do I like? You know, um, and I would start by, making myself meals that I really loved, you know, and it's the tiny little things that you do that just build up. On my podcast, I had a dating coach on there, and she calls self-love like having a love bucket, right? And filling up that love bucket, but if you don't have enough self-love, that love bucket has holes, so it's constantly leaking. And I think I love that image because once you fill up your self-love bucket, when it starts overflowing, that's when you can give it to everyone else.
Yeah, that is a great image.
So yeah, so that's kind of been the journey. And it's an as I said, it's an ongoing journey, and little things will happen and I slip back into my old ways because you've got to remember I've got 40 odd years of that conditioning. So it's not going to change in a year. It's not going to change in 2 years. It's going to take a lot of work. But, neuroscience shows us that we do change. Our brains change. So just because you've done something for 40 years doesn't mean you have to do it for the next 40. So yeah, that's kind of been the work. So it's still a work in progress, but I think now the other thing I did was start putting boundaries. And boundaries is having boundaries is the biggest act of self-love. Saying no is a really, really big act of self-love. And so yeah, those are just like simple strategies. And what I was finding is that the people that were, I guess, enjoying that I didn't have boundaries slowly started leaving my life. And, the people I started spending more time with changed. Um, my whole life started changing because I was now exercising because I loved my body instead of exercising to torture my body. Um, and everything started shifting. And the people in my life started changing. My job changed, you know, my friendships changed. Uh, my likes and dislikes changed because I didn't need that external validation anymore. I was getting it myself. I was giving it to myself.
That's beautiful. You said that your career, your profession changed. What are you doing today?
Well, I've had a couple of career changes since then. But at first I started working for an animal shelter, which was in London, which was the biggest joy of my life. That's where I met my dog, Jayda. Um, and I spent 5 years working there. I'd been volunteering for 3 years before. And yeah, those are were the most amazing, incredible years of my life. But when I moved back to Sydney, I I had to start again, new job, new friends, new home, everything. Um, and I plodded along for a little while, and then I decided to get into life coaching. So I started studying and graduated as a life coach, a holistic life coach and mind body practitioner. So now I'm very much excited about helping women who have felt the way I felt, and I use the stuck, stagnant, and spiritless because I think that really sums up how I felt. I felt like I was stuck in a life that wasn't mine, a life that was not moving anywhere, and I just didn't have enough joy. So yeah, so now I'm doing the coaching and the podcast. So, and again, through the podcast, I'm really enjoying helping share stories of incredible moments that have changed people's lives. And some of the stories are just so inspiring and so empowering. And there's a huge theme of self-love throughout these stories, and listening to your inner wisdom and your inner guidance, and living for yourself. So I'm loving spreading that awareness.
How do you feel like this new place that you're at in your life has enabled you to amplify a more authentic version of your voice?
Definitely, definitely. It was actually during a shamanic healing session that I was feeling a little bit lost, and still feeling like there was something missing from my life, but I couldn't quite pin what it was. And during this healing session, when we were clearing out our throat chakra, I had this clear message that, I need to start using my voice to help people heal. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. So as I always do, all right, universe, I think I have the message. Now tell me how. Um, and within a couple of weeks, I just had these incredible uh, meetings with people. And, at a networking event, I had 3 different people say to me, "Oh my God, your voice, you should do a podcast." And before that, I love podcasts, but I hadn't thought about doing one myself. And then once the idea, you know, kind of came to me, there was no stopping it. It was the creativity just kind of flowed. And um, yeah, I was in flow. And I think when you're in flow, things just happen. People come to you at the right times. And yeah, so that's how the podcast began.
Wow, I can't help but think that this is really a full circle moment for you. As we began our conversation with you at 10 years old,
Mhm.
a young girl who deliberately changed her voice, quieted her voice to fit in to the woman you are today, who has come into this full expression in using your voice as the vehicle to really amplify your wisdom and gifts and greatest impact. That's what this show is all about. And I just love your story so much. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Well, thank you for allowing me to share it. Yeah, I hope that someone out there listening um, can relate to, something that I've said. And, maybe if it's just listening to that self-talk, or, finding the courage to use their voice, um, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Which brings me to my final question, which I ask all my guests. What is one tip that you have for other women who are striving to honor their authentic voice?
Spend some time with yourself, and spend some time looking at yourself in the mirror. And if you can, naked. And rather than looking at yourself and judging, look at yourself naked and appreciate, and give thanks to your body. Those thighs that you think are a bit big, look at them and say thank you for, being so strong that you take me places. Look at your face, that, whatever, your nose might be a bit this, but why don't you say thank you, nose, for allowing me to smell that beautiful perfume yesterday, that beautiful flower yesterday, and just spend some time with yourself and appreciate yourself, because this is the body we have, right? So we've got to love it.
Amen to that, sister. Thank you for sharing that very beautiful tip. And thank you again for being here. How can people best connect with you and learn more about the coaching that you're offering?
My website is nautilusholistic.healing.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. And you can also follow my podcast, That Was the Moment, which has some incredible, incredible stories from people from around the world as well. So we've got stories about people being on, different health journeys, relationship breakdowns, mental health struggles, surviving, awful attacks, and yeah, just really lovely, inspiring men and women.
Wow, it sounds amazing. I look forward to joining you on your podcast.
Yes.
And to all the listeners here of Crescendo, thank you so much for tuning in. If this episode struck a chord or generated an insight that you'd like to share and capture, we would love it if you would comment, like, and share this through your social media platforms. And of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss future shows. Until next time, keep sharing your voice.